a slide up and you can let me know when to advance.
I would appreciate if you
Committee meeting this Wednesday, March the 8th. I'd like to call the meeting to order, and I'm going to ask the clerk to conduct a roll call.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor Bateman.
Here.
Chair Bradley. Councillor Campion. Councillor Davies.
I'm here.
Councillor Diodati. Councillor Gale.
I'm here.
Councillor Grant. Councillor Height.
Here.
Councillor Yip. Present. Councillor Redicott. Councillor Secord. Councillor Cisco.
Present.
Councillor Sorrento.
Here.
Councillor Whalen.
Present.
Councillor Zalepa. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this morning? Seeing none, we're going to move into our first item this morning.
Excuse me.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, Chair. Would I be permitted to make a statement about International Women's Day prior to beginning?
And
Sorry, I thought there was a moment to approve the agenda. I didn't.
no, you can do it under other business, though. So I'm more than happy to have you do that. Delegations this morning. We have an update on the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital redevelopment. I'm going to call on Kelly Campbell. She's the Vice President in Corporate Services and Capital Development at Hamilton Health Sciences. And it's going to be the delegation respecting the update on the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital redevelopment. And I'll remind Ms. Campbell of the 10-minute limit for delegations. Good morning, Kelly. And I did see your presentation at Lincoln Council, or your one at there as well. So I'm very pleased that you're here.
Good morning. Thank you very much. Good morning to all the council members. I'm happy to abide by the 10 minutes. So if we'll get started and we can go to the next slide. Thank you very much. So I'm here today to provide you an update on where we are with the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital redevelopment project, which is in construction. We'll take a look ahead at some of the milestones for this year, and then certainly an opportunity to answer any questions that the committee may have. Next slide, please. And we'll move right into the next one. Thank you. So this is just a reminder of the journey we've had, and I know that Niagara's had a similar journey with the new Niagara Falls Hospital. But this is, we're at the final stage, construction and implementation, completing final design and construction documents. In 2022, the Ministry Capital Branch revised its planning stages. So this isn't a reflection of current. The numbering is different, but this would be what we had when we started and worked through the phases of the project. Next slide, please. So the new West Lincoln, for those that have been by the site in Grimsby, we're building directly behind the existing hospital. This is an overview that's a little bit old now. There's actually columns coming up out of the site, which is great to see that progress. The new hospital will have 55 inpatient beds, 6 maternal newborn suites, and 8 bassinets. The programs at the site will include emergency department, diagnostic imaging, complex care, continuing care, acute inpatient care, maternal and newborn, day surgery and endoscopy, as well as ambulatory care. Our outpatient services will be centralized into an ambulatory care center. We will double the current number of operating rooms from 2 to 4, increasing our surgical capacity. The new hospital will be unbelievably about 80% larger than the existing. just given modern standards for building since the West Lincoln Hospital was built many years ago. And it will be 100%, excuse me, 100% single patient rooms. Next slide, please. Next slide. So we'll review where we've been in 2022. So we finalized the contract with Elliston as our Protoco in spring. We had a groundbreaking ceremony at the site at the end of April. Early site works were completed through the fall. The emergency department platform was expanded. Lots of hoarding went up. If you've driven by the hospital, you'll notice that Elliston has all their trailers on the front lawn with hoarding around that. We relocated the kitchen. There was some alterations to parking. The site was cleared and cleaned up, ready for construction. Our West Lincoln Foundation, of course, has had a campaign. They completed and met their goal for local share in the fall. Municipal contributions, including the region, has been vital to helping us build this new hospital and meet our local share plan. Crane was installed at the site in December, and excavation, foundations, and as I mentioned, columns are underway currently. Next slide, please. So looking ahead, what to expect for next year. You have to sort of click through this one. Thank you. So construction, obviously building structure will continue to progress over this year. We'll start to see cladding and some interior finishes beginning towards the end of the year. We've completed 100% design, and now we're working towards 100% of construction documents. Furniture, fixtures, and equipment, which is a big part of our local share. Multi-year procurement will begin this year, and an inventory once again done, just to update to assure we're replacing the things that need to be replaced and identifying those that are appropriate to move to the new hospital. In terms of operational readiness, we've hired an operational readiness manager. That planning transition between the current and the future building is a considerable volume of work given the size differential. Departments will be operating differently and in new space. So we're creating those processes and procedures for both clinical and non-clinical teams to successfully occupy the new building in 2025. Next slide, please. So here's our redevelopment project timeline. Substantial completion is scheduled for February of 2025. From a local share contribution perspective, this means that 30 days in advance of that substantial completion, we would need payments from the foundation, the councils, and the region so that we can make that substantial completion payment on time. There will be a transition period moving into the hospital of 4 to 6 months where we make sure all the equipment is in place, start to train staff on the site with an expected opening sometime mid-2025. Then we'll have the final work of demolishing the old hospital, landscaping that area, creating some additional parking capacity, and finishing off the project about a year later in the summer of 2026. Next slide, please. So we have started to see some renderings and are looking at interior design and colors, which of course is the really fun and exciting part of the project for the teams. This is just some concepts of clinical spaces using lots of color, very much working with the community that we're living in terms of connection to the escarpment, the lake, the farming that goes on in the community and making those connections. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples of the areas. This would be the emergency department and diagnostic imaging. You can see in the emerge the orange color. That is sort of a pop of color, not only in the furnishings, but in some of the wall art that we'll see in the new build, as well as diagnostic imaging, creating that purple, where it's both a wayfinding method for patients and visitors, but also just adds some design elements to the space. Next slide, please. This would be an example on the left of a communication station within an inpatient unit, where of course nursing, physicians, allied health would be able to group together And then as well on the right side, just looking into monitored bedrooms, so a view from the communication station. Next slide, please. On the left, a concept for an inpatient room, view from the room entrance. You'll see the rooms are quite large, large windows that will face either to the lake or to the escarpment. All again, single private rooms to modern building standards. And then on the right side, sort of the escarpment view that you would have. Next slide, please. And maternal newborn area, again, using color as a way to not only identify an area for wayfinding, but also just warming up the environment, again, using screens in this case to provide some privacy for a waiting area on the left, but also visibility in, and then a labor and recovery room on the right side. And next slide, please. So just in terms of communications, obviously we're trying to keep everyone updated on where we are. We have regular updates for our patients, staff, and physicians, the community stakeholders about the redevelopment project, and I'm sure we'll be back with your permission to give the region further updates. Lots of storytelling, social media, media relations, and in-person opportunities. We have a West Lincoln community newsletter that shares regular news and updates, and an opportunity for anyone to sign up for that newsletter. Lots of ways for the community to stay in touch. And then Tom Perry, of course, who helped us arrange this event today, is the direct contact for the project, and his information is included there. And I think that's my final slide. So happy to take any questions, but certainly, again, appreciate the ongoing support of the region as we work through this project. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Kelly. I can say as a politician from the West Niagara area, and it's been well over 20 years that I have been involved in this project as well, and it's very exciting to see us moving into the final stages of this. And I can tell you the community was very excited about seeing the crane go up. That actually had everybody actually saying it is finally really happening. So that ended up going right through the community when that all happened. So anyway, thank you very much for your presentation. I have Councillor Sorrento who would like to ask a question.
Thank you, Chair. Through you to Ms. Campbell. Can you tell us how much the provincial government contributed toward the build?
Yeah, so the provincial government funding formula is very cut and dried. They contribute 90% of construction and ancillary costs, and then the 10% left over, as well as all of the local share for furniture, fixtures, and equipment, falls to the hospital and the community for fundraising. So on this particular project, I can't quote you the exact numbers, I apologize. It's a $289 million total construction project, wow. All in. So local share would be included in that, which is about 50 million. So the ministry itself, the province, would be contributing 90% of the balance.
Fantastic, that's great, thank you. And through you, Chair, to the presenter. Now, I thought I heard you mention something about a regional contribution. So will you and your team be looking to us for some funding? Did I understand that correctly?
Actually, I'll answer that one, Kelly.
Thank you.
So actually, we have committed to 10.5 million approximately already to it. That was last term of council.
Okay, all right. And just one more question, Chair, through you, I guess, to you and or to the commissioner or to the CEO. Is that part of our purview? Do we actually fund the hospitals? And forgive me, so I don't know if we do.
So through the chair, thanks for that question. Yes, we started developing that when the original Niagara Health System hospital was built in St. Catharines. West Lincoln Memorial was another one that we funded, and then most recently we've committed to funding for the Niagara Health System South Niagara Falls Hospital. So those three are generally are the three that we've committed to. And if you were, question is there a requirement of the region?
Thank you.
it has become a requirement of the local municipalities. The local municipalities, in this case, Grimsby, West Lincoln, had committed to that, and we joined that commitment. But it is tending to be a requirement that the local municipalities, including regions, fund hospital redevelopment. As I indicated during the budget discussions, it's becoming more prominent. There's a number of redevelopments that are happening across the province, and the provincial government is looking for that. So if you want the hospitals built, that seems to be the funding model that you have to go through.
That's great. Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you, Councillor Sorrento. Councillor Bateman.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, Chair. Happy International Women's Day, Ms. Campbell. Thank you for being here and speaking. This is really exciting, I think, for our entire region. I have some questions around slide 5, I believe it is, the nitty gritty. It's wonderful to see that it's 80% larger than the existing hospital, 100% single patient rooms. You know, at my time in the hospital, sharing rooms, it doesn't exactly improve your health if you know, there's a lot of noise in rooms. So I have some questions around specifics of the signature programs. And I know that what you've provided is kind of an overview, but for people seeking, like, let's say they're diabetics, and they need care, or cancer patients, where do they fall in?
Yeah, so great question. Thank you very much for that, and happy International Women's Day to you as well. So patients with diabetes often have other conditions, but certainly through ambulatory care, they'll be referred through their family physician in the community to the services that they need. In West Lincoln right now, you know, the Buddy Hospital in Hamilton is Jurvinski, so any cancer care treatments from the region go to the Jurvinski Cancer Center. That happens now. That will continue in the future. Larger inpatient surgeries that are not gynecology also go into Hamilton to our sites to the appropriate specialty. So none of that changes in the new build, but certainly the immediate care for community members will take place at the hospital, and then the appropriate referrals will go out depending on the issue.
And that is that kind of a provincial, the way our hospital systems are designed now, that they, so I think, I hope I'm right here, but so for heart patients, for instance, I believe they would go to St. Catharines, but you said cancer patients would go to Jurvinski. So it's kind of diagnose and figure out what the problem is and then send them to the specialist. Is that correct?
Yeah, very much so. And again, there is some cancer care that occurs in the NHS and the Niagara health system for chemotherapy, as an example. So the provincial model is really that not all hospitals can support all services and specialties. So for cardiac, as an example, Hamilton General would be the regional specialty. For stroke care, the Hamilton General. For trauma care, the Hamilton General. For community care, absolutely, as much care as we can provide in a hospital, we will. But for that specialty level of care all across the province, it's going to a center that specializes in that. So that's no different in this region than it would be, you know, in Toronto. Children, as an example, that require specialty care would be going to a children's hospital and not just staying in the community.
So you mentioned maternal and newborn, which is wonderful, and midwives will have, obviously they'll have privileges at West Lincoln.
Correct. Yeah, as
Wonderful.
they do now. Midwives are a big part of the maternal newborn program at West Lincoln.
Okay, wonderful. One more question about maternal care. When we talk about it, I believe abortion care falls under that. Is that correct? Does that fall under maternal and newborn?
Not at this site, no.
Can you explain why that would be?
Yeah, so abortion care is generally centralized, again, like other specialty services across the province, with providers that are comfortable providing that and have the resources to do so. We do provide that service at our Jurvinski site. for the region, and other centers do as well. So it's generally not done at every hospital, again, depending on the comfort level of the providers.
So just to clarify, if a woman needed an abortion, she would have to go out of region. Is that what you're saying?
Well, Hamilton is within this region from Grimsby.
Oh, from Grimsby. Okay. So, okay. Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. Councillor Whalen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Kelly, for your presentation. Just one question. First off, I don't mean to put you on a spot, but I just wanted, in the past, we've asked whether you approached Hamilton for some assistance with your funding. Has that been done, or can you tell me maybe whether you're involved with that, or whether it's been done, or for an answer received? So being that you're, okay, being that you're, I'm sure a lot of your patients come from the Hamilton, east end of Hamilton. That being the case, we asked that your committee approach Hamilton for some assistance in financing and funding the project. Do you know that that's been done or not?
Yeah, so there are certainly some patients that would come to West Lincoln. There's far more that go from West Lincoln into Hamilton. Hamilton, that we're working with the city right now around funding for the new Jurbinsky Hospital, which is also in redevelopment. That has about a $300 million local share and $1 billion bill. So this was very much an approach to the councils in the region for Grimsby itself. And then Hamilton has both St. Joe's and HHS to support in terms of new construction with significantly more dollars involved. So again, more patients come from Grimsby to Hamilton than go the other way. So no, there was not the consideration that Hamilton would support this hospital, but very much they will be supporting the Jurvinsky, which sees many patients from the Grimsby area.
That's great, thank you. And just one last question. It's great to see this coming along with the dates and expectation of finalizing the project. I have to answer this a question at the end. It's great to see that. I believe that the Niagara Falls site is almost on par with the closing expectation date. I don't know whether staff can answer that or not. I think it was pretty well same timelines as to finish both projects.
My understanding is it's about 2 years out from that.
Which is the same as this project, 2025, so.
No, it's longer than that.
So Niagara Health System had just recently announced that the selected contractor, and I believe it's 2 years out. It was going to be 1 year, but it was extended an additional year. But I can get that information for you.
That's great, appreciate it. And Kelly, great work, and it's great to see that you're leading the charge with these two hospitals. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Whalen. Councillor Height, you're good? Okay, good. Thanks a lot, Kelly, for the presentation this morning. Very much appreciated on behalf of Council.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Let us move into our items for consideration this morning. We do have two that we're going to be working through before we start into our first item, and that is our financial update. I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Harrison.
So as Donovan is walking up, I just wanted to say for committee, I just want to acknowledge the great work that's been done by our team. As I indicated in the budget discussions, the budget team had been totally replaced throughout last year. Interestingly enough, the financial reporting team, who is responsible for generating the financial statements, but also the Q4 updates, was totally revamped as well. And I want to do a shout out to Donovan D'Ambrose, Kaylin McLean, and Mike McDonald. The three of them were the leaders of it. It takes our entire PFS team and the corresponding assistance from operating departments, but I just wanted to recognize they had the information done to assist us with the final deliberations in the budget, which is unusual because of the budget cycle being through the first part of the year. Anyways, I'll turn it over to Donovan now.
Yeah, and Donovan, just to make sure that we say your name properly, is Donovan D'Amboise? Is that what you go by, or yep. What's your preference?
D'Amboise.
Yeah, okay,
yep,
okay, great.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Please go ahead.
Perfect. So, good morning. As we just established, my name is Donovan D'Amboise, and I'm the Acting Associate Director of reporting and analysis, and I'm happy to be here this morning to present the 2022 year-end financial results. For your reference, this is a high-level overview of my presentation this morning. The goal of my presentation is to complement the detailed information in report CSD 2020-2023 on your agenda today. Before we jump into the results, this slide provides context of where we're at in the process. On December 16th, 2021, Council approved a budget that was guided by the budget planning bylaw and capital financing policy. This process is where Council decided what resources it wanted to allocate where and to what programs for 2022. We're here today to summarize the financial results against those budget allocations made. The financial reporting process is guided by the 4 key policies in the circles, which will help us control and manage the region's finances, and we continue to rely on that control framework to manage our results. Staff consolidate and summarize all financial reporting requirements into our Q4 financial report, which is available on our external website. It's also in Appendix 4 to the report in front of you today. It's a large report with a lot of detailed financial information on all aspects of the Niagara region's operations and meets the financial reporting requirements outlined in our policies. While we focus on operating and capital results as well as year-end transfer recommendations today, there's a lot of other information in the report like reserves, encumbrances, debt, investments, and accounts receivables. So 2022 key messages. The primary drivers of the corporate deficit as presented in our Q3 forecast and also through the budget cycle remain. The main differences being that our actual results are now known versus our projections and estimates as part of Q3. The 2022 levy deficit is largely driven by development charge grants. Of the $25.4 million in COVID budget funded from the Taxpayer Relief Reserve, 22.3 was able to be returned to the reserve through swapping incremental external funding received in year during 2022. Transfer recommendations in this report are aligned with the surplus deficit policy, with funds being allocated either to or from our stabilization reserves and to capital reserves. We have also made a recommendation in relation to the capital variance projects to maintain excess funds to address inflationary pressures in the 2023 capital program given the current environment. And so I will give more details on all of the above throughout this presentation. The financial results that I'm presenting today are based on actual results as of December 31st, 2022. This slide provides an overview of year-end position for both levy and rate-supported programs. I would like to draw your attention to the 2 rows in bold. The levy-supported programs have a year-end deficit of $2.25 million, with 1.6 relating to regional departments and general government, and 685,000 relating to the ABCs. The deficit of $2.25 million as a percentage of gross budgeted expenditures is 0.23%. And the bottom row bold there, the rate program has a surplus of $1.6 million, $1.2 million for waste management, and $438,000 for water and wastewater, which represents about 0.75% of budgeted gross expenditures. Some of the factors impacting the regional department's deficit of $1.6 million, which is 0.22% of gross budgeted expenditures. Just under $12 million deficit for higher than budgeted uptake in levy-funded DC grants, primarily driven by brownfield and agriculture grants. Net surplus of $4.6 million in labor-related costs, largely due to temporary vacancies across the corporation due to issues with recruiting. We've also experienced savings in self-insured insurance claim payouts, as well as our consulting expense of $1.7 million and $2.2 million, respectively. Factors impacting ABC's consolidated deficit of $685,000 or 0.2% of gross expenditures budget. The main driver of the deficit in ABCs is higher than budgeted property maintenance costs in Niagara Regional Housing of $1.7 million, offset by $1.2 million in higher than budgeted rental revenues. $777,000 deficit in courts driven primarily by decreased ticket volumes compared to budget. NRPS saw labor-related savings and IT savings of $463,000 and $457,000 respectively. And NRPS also had a small deficit on its revenues of $223,000. Moving to the rate programs. First, on the left, factors impacting water wastewater surplus of $438,000, which is about 0.3% of budgeted gross expenditures. $1.6 million net utility savings driven by lower than anticipated rates. $1.2 million pressure driven by higher than budgeted chemical and sludge collection costs. And $620,000 pressure as a result of decreased water sales, primarily due to weather. And then on the right, factors impacting waste management surplus of $1.2 million or 1.68% of budgeted gross expenditures. $938,000 in higher than anticipated net market revenues from the sale of recyclable commodities arising from increased commodity prices. This was experienced primarily in the first part of the year and has since decreased, which is offset by $611,000 in higher than anticipated collection costs, which are subject to increases based on CPI, and $525,000 savings in labor-related costs associated with temporary staff vacancies. This slide is an overview of our financial activities as of our COVID financial activities as of December 31st. Drawing your attention to the total Niagara region line in bold, our net COVID expenditures at the end of the year for the Niagara region, inclusive of ABCs and rates, is $46.4 million. This is offset with $43.2 million of external funding, resulting in $3.1 million transferred from the Taxpayer Relief Reserve, and I'll provide a further breakdown of the reserve usage on the next slide. The $3.1 million transferred from the reserve was primarily used in the Senior Services Division for long-term care. And it's important to note the province runs on a March 31st budget year, so we're still anticipating to see some funding announced that will offset that remaining balance used from the reserve. Generally, there's a 2 or 3 month lag in funding being confirmed or announced from the province from the period that it relates. This slide has been included to provide committee with a revised picture of our taxpayer relief reserve in 2022 compared to budget, as well as a forecast for 2023 and 2024. So first, to compare 2022 budget to 2022 actuals, which is the first 2 columns on the chart. On the 5th line, you can see the total funding transfers for 2022 required only $3.1 million compared to the $25.4 million budget for COVID. On the next line, you will see the $2.2 million transfer to fund the 2022 levy operating deficit. So the result for 2022 compared to budget is an ending reserve balance of $48.7 million compared to the 28.6 projected with the budget before we knew about what external COVID funding we would see. Next, the 2023 budget column has been updated to reflect the results of Bill 23 and recent 2023 budget decisions, as well as ongoing COVID costs. So on the 4th row, you will see $19.3 million earmarked to fund Bill 23 impacts as per report CSD 14/2023. And on the 5th row, you will see an estimated $17.4 million for COVID-19 costs. It's important to note that we still do not know about funding from the province to offset Bill 23 impacts, and we also anticipate continued incremental COVID-19 funding for 2023 as well. So while our projections show the reserve being drawn down to $5.5 million at the end of 2023, and overdrawn to the tune of about $2 million at the end of 2024. This is likely worst case, as we should see funding come in to be able to reduce the reliance on the reserve, similar to what I just explained has happened in 2022, budget versus actual. However, until the funding is confirmed, we continue to earmark the use of reserve. as our funding source. This table provides an overview of our forecasted balances compared to reserve targets based on the 10 to 15% of operating expenses. With the year-end deficit of $2.2 million, the taxpayer relief reserve remains below target. The water stabilization reserve is within our funding targets. The wastewater stabilization reserve remains below target. The waste management stabilization reserve is within our funding target, as is the waste management stabilization reserve. As a reminder, when a balance is below target, it will impact the organization's ability to manage operational risks. To close out the presentation in relation to operating results, recommendations are outlined in CSD 2023 are aligned with the operating surplus and deficit policy, and levy results funded by taxpayer relief reserve and rate surpluses are allocated back to rate reserves. I will get into the capital variance project and another technique to manage risk around our capital projects. So turning to capital, the purpose of this slide is to show the consolidated status of the capital program for the levy and rate programs. For context, we have 580 active capital projects, which are all at different phases in their life cycle and are constantly changing. So which phase a project is in can significantly impact these numbers. So while this is the consolidation of the capital programs at a high level, it does show consistent trends or progress year over year in our levy and water programs. Our wastewater and waste management programs are seeing increasing total active budgets due to a few key projects still getting started in 2022. For more details on specific capital projects, you'll find them in pages 80 to 98 of the Appendix 4, and you'll find information around project budget, year-to-date or project-to-date actuals and commitments, budget remaining, forecasted spend, and year of completion. We have summarized the activity in the capital variance projects for your reference here. The capital variance project is the accumulation of funds budgeted for capital projects and not used, and subsequently used to fund unforeseen costs in other active capital projects. In 2022, a net amount of $11.3 million across all 4 projects has been made available through project closures and budget adjustments for future capital projects. Per budget control bylaw, excess funds in capital variance projects must be transferred to capital reserves. The $1 million target balance has been our practice for each of the 4 capital variance projects, with anything over the $1 million balance being deemed excess fund and transferred to capital reserves as included as a recommendation as part of the year-end report. Given current inflationary pressures, staff is recommending keeping all surplus funds in the CVP or in the capital variance projects. Recommendation number 5 in the report asks to keep $21.7 million in the capital variance projects as outlined on this slide. These funds must be used to address unforeseen cost pressures in existing capital projects or be transferred to capital reserves. Important to note is that the amount represents only about 1% of the total budget for currently active capital projects. Also important to note is any use of a capital variance project greater than $250,000 requires council approval through the budget control bylaw. The need to maintain these balances will continue to be assessed throughout the year, and any excess can still be made available for use as a funding source in the 2024 capital budget. And then you could see page 98 of your Appendix 4 for the capital variance project details in more detail. As far as next steps, preparation of the consolidated financial statements and the completion of audit is to be presented to audit committee on May 15th, 2023. And preparation of our annual report is slated to be published in June of 2023. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you very much, Donovan. What we're going to do is we're going to have questions coming through to this, but I think it would be appropriate for us to also put the report on the floor because there may be questions subsequent to that. So, Councillor Gale, can I get you to move that we put CSD 2023 on the floor? And Councillor Whalen, would you second that, please?
That's fine, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So we now have the report and the presentation available for questions. So the first up is Councillor Sorrento. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Chair Foster, and through you to Assistant Director D'Amboise. I just need clarification. When you were talking about DC grants, is that another name for that, the CIP, the BTIP, and I think there's one that's, BTA something. Is that what that's referring to, the DC grants?
Yeah, I'm gonna actually defer this to Director
Yeah.
Furtado. For
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll do that.
Sorry, sorry, Chair.
Director.
Yeah, through the chair, the specific grants that are being referred to in this presentation are the development charge grants, which are specific to the incentive policy around the agricultural DC grants and the brownfield DC grants. And so the brownfield is somewhat tied to the brownfield CIPs, but it's more in particular to transitional provisions that were provided in the incentive program to maintain some old grants while we adopted some new ones.
Councillor Sorrento?
Okay, yeah, no, I'm just trying to wrap my head around it, but I'll get to that at another point in time. I can just look it up or research it. Now, there was mention through you, Chair, to the Assistant Director, and I'm still holding out hope that the province is going to reimburse the communities, and I'll keep pounding that drum. So if we were to get it, where would that money go? At that time.
So through the chair, if we were to receive that, you're referring to the $3.1 million drop on the taxpayer relief reserve for COVID?
Through the chair to the director, to assistant director, and I'm talking about the $19 million in charges that we've taken as a result of Bill 23.
Of Bill 23.
Or potential result of Bill 23.
Yeah, so through the chair, the money would be similar to what we did for COVID funding throughout 2022. When that money is confirmed from the province, then it would be returned to the taxpayer relief reserve, and we would use the provincial funding.
Okay, all right. And we could discuss at that time what council would want to do with that money in conjunction with staff. Okay. Just a couple more questions, Chair, and through you to the Assistant Director. So you mentioned that we're still holding out until the end of March 31st for senior services to get a potential, what is it, $2.9 million from the province. And so my question is, can you give us an update, and when will we actually know, have a confirmed answer as a yes or no as to whether or not that funding's coming to us?
So through the chair, our experience with our long-term care COVID funding, there, as I mentioned, there's been about a 2 or 3 month lag. So with respect to the period ending December 31st, 2022, we could expect to hear that hopefully before the end of March.
Okay, great. And one final question, Chair, through you to the Assistant Director. Are these reserve funds current? I know the report said as of December 31st, but is there a variance today if we were to look at that? Like, so for instance, in the taxpayers stabilization reserve fund, it says almost $49 million. What would that be in there today, or would it be a little bit less?
So through the chair, are you, just to clarify, are you asking that the balance at December 31st is the 48.7 million? And that would be correct. That's what would be in there as of December 31st.
No, through you to the chair, what I'm asking is what the balance would be today. And I know it's kind of like not in the report. Like, would it be different? Would the balance today be different? No? Interesting. Okay.
A bunch of head shaking no.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. No further questions. Thank you for your presentation. Thank you for the very hard work. It just keeps blowing my mind when I keep reading these reports and going through them. Again, how academic they are, how complicated they are, because I'm not trained in the language, and it's pretty amazing stuff. So thank you. No further questions, Chair. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Sorrento. Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Donovan, for your presentation. But I find it disturbing, not your fault, but we have a spending problem at the Niagara region. the 2022 year-end deficit as reported to you, I had a 2.24 million, but it's 2.25 million, I guess. Regardless, it's a lot of money. And never in my last 9 years as an elected office have I seen a deficit. You've offered DC grants, or we've offered DC grants for the past 9 years, so to blame DC grants on the deficit isn't appropriate. You fairly said that with the DC, with Bill 23, we can't count on the money from the province and you can never count on it until it's actually there, and I get that. But the province has said that they would compensate us for the DCs that we lose, the DC money we lose. I think some of the stipulations were that our reserves are not too high. They'll look at all these things, and I think that's fair. And with COVID, they said they'd compensate us, and they did. So I'm counting on that. But again, you can't have that in your report. We hit the taxpayers with a 7.5 or approximately 8% increase. Then we had increases in transit, water, waste, and that were separate. We bolstered our reserves in a tough year, which I disagreed on this, and I disagreed on it with my vote. Now we hit the taxpayers with no notices of a deficit. I'm just ranting, Mr. Chair, but I think the CAO and others would agree that we have to watch our spending coming up, and we have to look at projects and things like this. I'm not looking for a comment from you, Donovan, but it's open to comment from anybody on this. I just think that we have to look at this.
Yeah, so no, that's not through to you, Donovan. Much more political than that. We just had a very extensive budget process that we've gone through, and a lot of this was discussed already. So I'm going to turn it to Mr. Harrison for further comment.
So the deficit is a reflection of spending commitments, and while I respect your opinion, Councillor Gale, it is driven by the higher than actual or higher than budget expenditures on exemption, DC exemptions. That was clear all through the year. One of the things about spending money, like the exemptions for DCs, is that they must be paid, and so we've made commitments, and they must be paid for. Certainly, the budget discussion resulted in an amount that was been well reported, and the reasons for that increase are well documented: capital infrastructure renewal, inflation, ABCs, some of them a little bit higher than expected, and also catch up on, in addition to the DC element, but also some catch up on some past decisions of council. So quite frankly, all staff will be looking at our expenditures going forward. And as I've said at many council meetings or committee meetings, and it's not my line, it was a treasurer in St. Catharines that had used it. Every committee meeting is a budget night, and every time a new expenditure commitment or proposal comes forward, we do have to fund those. So as far as the deficits go, I would say that, or not the deficit, but the reserves. The reserves are within, at the low end of what normal financial practices would be. They're not excessive. And while we do hear a lot of commitments from the provincial government, until we actually receive direction that they are going to fund it, it would be not prudent, and I wouldn't recommend that we would take it on a potential commitment. So I appreciate your comments, and that's all I have.
Councillor Gale?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I cannot disagree with anything that he just said on this. And it's not up to, my point of talking was not to staff, it was to council. I think council has to realize on this. And being on the low end, you mentioned on the deficit and the reserves and that. I wish we were on the low end on the budget increase of 7.5%, but compared to other places, we're unique in our at 7.5 with transit and everything else being separated from it. So my point is, I've never seen a deficit here. I don't know when the last time it was. It's time for us to start looking at all our projects, and I'm sure staff are on it, but I have no complaints with staff with what came up with the budget. It's up to the council. Thank you.
I think Donovan has some information on the last time we had a deficit.
So, through the chair, our last deficit for regional departments was in 2018, regional departments had a deficit of 1.7 million. And then the last time there was a levy deficit was in 2017, $3.6 million.
Okay, I think I stand corrected then in the last 6 years then. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gale. Councillor Bateman.
Thank you, Chair. I, listening to Councillor Gale speak to this, you know, I know he's been around for a while, and I entirely respect his view on this, but we did have an opportunity, right, to keep our budget. I think it was to 7.3, and then at a council meeting, we bumped it up, and I believe it was, correct me if I'm wrong, for to support industry. There were opportunities for us as a council, and I voted against that because it came out as something that we could strike from our budget. So I think we need to be honest about what we're supporting and when we're supporting. So my question is more of a procedural question, Chair. When we're looking at, so obviously I'm with Councillor Gale on not wanting a 10% budget in, or a 10% tax levy next next year. And I'm just wondering, and I think all of council made that clear that that's not what we want. I'm wondering how these departments work with you, Commissioner Harrison, to get to the point where we're making decisions that will impact the budget. And I'll use waste management as an example. So I think the only way to lower that budget is to lower the amount of waste we're putting into landfills and do a better job of that. So I use that because it's pretty simple, but I'm wondering what through your role as the treasurer, how do you communicate with the departments to ensure that we're doing all we can prior to getting to the point where we almost have no choice but to pass a budget 7, 8, 9, 10%? Does that make sense?
I'm going to transfer this to the CAO.
Oh, perfect.
Because he's
Thank
the
you.
one that's ultimately responsible for all of this. So go ahead, Mr. Tripp.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair, through you, and I appreciate the question. As I think I indicated in the budget deliberation process, that was basically how the conversation started in around June of last year. We knew what the outlook was at that point. We brought a report to council, and it was, I guess bleak is a pretty good word. But in order to, the direction to staff is assuming we're maintaining the services that we currently have, that council has supported in the past, or we're legislatively obliged or required to provide, what is the absolute minimum necessary to provide those services? And in this particular case, in 2023, there was no appetite for anything new to be entertained, and there wasn't in the budget other than the EMS services that council approved, and some other things that were actually paid for by other sources of funding. So that's really how every budget process starts. We are going to have to look very hard at the coming year, because I understand 10% after the 7.58 is not appealing to any of us. So really, it's looking at everything that we do, and unless we are to stop doing certain services or reduce service levels, what's the absolute minimum necessary for that? And just, I'm going to highlight something just in terms of what the councillor said, and it's not to be contradictory to her, but it's a reflection of how complicated this process is. And again, not being critical, the comment was we reduce waste, we're going to reduce our costs in waste management, when in fact it's quite the opposite. As the real, as you'll hear through waste management and the master planning in that area, the real bulk of reducing waste is through the organics program, getting that stuff out of the waste stream and into the organics program, reduces what we put into our landfills. It's actually more expensive than actually landfilling for us right now, but it is the right thing to do. So it's just a reflection of how complicated the process is in terms of overall across the organization.
Councillor Bateman?
That's it. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Height?
Yes, before I make comments or some questions to Mr. D'Amboise, a comment about reserves. There is a policy, and we're abiding by that policy by keeping the reserves, I think, between 10 to 15%. Is that what you said?
Through the chair, per the policy, that is our target balance is 10 to 15% of gross operating expenditures.
And follow up, and we are staying within that range. So we aren't 25%. We're staying in that range, the appropriate range.
So through the chair,
When we can. Some were lower, but we aren't going well over that, are we?
correct. Sorry, through the chair, we're not overfunded on any of our reserves relative to that 15% target.
Okay, follow-up question regarding capital variance, at that bare minimum. Can we move money from water to wastewater to levy to waste management? Can we move money around, or does it stay in that specific fund?
Through the chair, practice has been that given that the reserves stay with the source of the funding, so generally, no, there's not the flexibility to move money around with the balances.
A follow-up question regarding the COVID funding transfers. You stated very clearly, hopefully by the end of March, we're going to know if we get the 3.1 million. That's correct or not?
Through the chair, that's correct, yeah.
If we do get that, and hopefully we do, what about the 17.4 million? When will we know whether we're going to get funded for the 2023 from March to 2024 March funding that we're looking at, that you're showing a deficit of 17.4 million?
So through the chair, that $17.4 million budget relates to all of the COVID expenditures across the corporation, which is public health, long-term care, et cetera. Funding announcements come throughout the year from the province based on really the province's timeline and when they are asking for that information and in alignment with our reporting requirements to them. So quite frankly, we don't always have line of sight on the timing of those announcements. They will come in year when they.
The follow-up, the reason I'm asking that question, that as we start spending money, which we're going to, and we're spending it now for COVID, as an example, in the Penn Center, they have a spot that people can go and get their vaccine right now. If we find out that the province is going to not fund us, then we should be saving some money by closing some of those clinics. And I'm wondering, at which point do we find out that they are not going to fund us so we can then start trying to save money? Any idea? Like, is it if we submit now, do we find out within 3 months or 8 months?
I'm going to snag that question and send it over to the commissioner with that one.
So, thanks for that question. I mean, if in the likelihood that they're not going to have that funding program, we are currently leasing space for those areas, and the dependence on the lease would be the timing of when that announcement, if it ever came. All indications that I've understood is that the ministry is going to continue to fund those areas, that they're not stating it publicly, but they are implying that that program will continue through the year. However, if they announced that they didn't, we'd have to come back to committee and make a statement as that we're going to cease to do that. That would have impacts on staffing, would have impacts on our least expense. And it would be depending on the timing, depending on the timing and the nature of what the announcement would be.
Follow up. The reason I asked that question, and that's to Director Harrison, Commissioner Harrison, sorry, boss. As I was at the Penn Center the other day, there were probably 8 or 10 staff waiting to help people get vaccinated, and I didn't see a person in that location. And my concern is, as we continue on for the next 6 or 8 months, if we're not going to be funded, we shouldn't be wasting our time, effort, energy, and taxpayer dollars having that open. So that's my concern, that we have to find out quickly enough to start cutting some of our expenses.
I appreciate that, and we certainly, if that was the direction of the provincial government, we would be coming back from public health and coming back to the committee to action those items. I just wanted to add something on one of the charts that was in the presentation that Donovan did. You had asked about where we are in regard to our reserves, and two of the reserves are below what the bottom of the target would be. And I think Mr. D'Amboise indicated correctly that it does add to the risk of the region in case there are unknown things that happen that we need to draw upon those funds during the
Follow-up, the reason I was asking those questions was I'm not concerned about the reserve. I'm hoping that we keep at that policy level that we're trying to keep at least a minimum because of that rainy day. We aren't sure what's going to happen tomorrow, and we need money in the reserves. So that was a concern of mine. Now, as far as a comment you made, Mr. Harrison, you commented to Mr. Councillor Sorrento that it is becoming our responsibility to fund hospitals. It is not our responsibility. It's something that we've been doing and started doing. Other regions don't do that. Is that not correct? Some regions do not fund hospital funding.
So we had provided a policy to council when we were engaged in the West Lincoln Memorial Hospital funding, which indicated historically that some municipalities, some upper tiers, did not provide that.
Well, that's what I wanted him to hear, because you inferred that it is common now. It's becoming common, but it isn't.
So can we let Mr. Harrison finish?
But I also, it was a caveat that I mentioned at the budget meeting. It is my understanding through discussions with treasurers that I deal with throughout the province that this is becoming more of an onus on local municipalities to fund hospitals if they're interested in doing it. And some of the ones that we had identified historically had not funded are in fact changing their direction now. That's a trend that's happening, Councillor, but certainly I didn't want to mislead Councillor Sorrento that there weren't others that had historically not contributed.
But I'm getting at, we were leading the trend. Now it has become the trend. When we were doing this, it was not a common occurrence that regions funded hospitals. It was local municipalities only. And that's why I wanted to bring that up, because as we look at the 2.2 million deficit, if we hadn't funded hospice, if we hadn't funded the hospitals, we wouldn't be at a 2.2, and that's why I was bringing that up. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Height. Councillor Yip.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation. And I think just to piggyback on Councillor Height's comments, the requirement from the province, if I'm not mistaken, is that there is a local contribution, but it doesn't necessarily have to come from municipalities or regions. It could be entirely local fundraising. I mean, whether there's the capacity for that in the community is a different question. But just to clarify that there is not an expectation from the province that it come from municipal governments, but again, the trend is going that way. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Yip. For the second time, Councillor Sorrento.
Thank you, Chair, and my bad. I had a couple of additional questions that I thought I was going to ask later on, but you put the report on the floor, so I apologize for that, and so I'll get to them now. And so through you, either to Commissioner Harrison or Assistant Director D'Amboise, I saw in the report that there were some ineligible costs for the Canada Summer Games in the amount of approximately $4 million.
That's the next report,
oh, is that the
Councillor
next report?
Sorrento.
Okay, okay, thank you for that direction. And then I think there's something in there for unused funds for GO stations. Is that in the next report, Chair? Okay,
I'm going to turn that over to Director Furtado.
Okay, so my question is through you to the director. As I see that there's 941,000 that has been transferred back into the capital levy. When could we expect to use that? And at what point will we be accessing those funds for the development of GO in the great city of Niagara Falls and the stellar city of St. Pat?
Through the chair, the particular items that you're referring to are for the operating costs associated with the two facilities that we have already acquired. So just because those buildings are not yet operational on some of the items that we are implementing, those funds are surplus, but they will be used for those facilities once the renovation works are done to those two facilities. So it's a surplus, a temporary surplus for this year for 2022, but work is proceeding on those in 2023 through the oversight of Director Robinson.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. Chair, am I able to make a comment? I think I can make a comment.
You certainly can.
I think the thing that concerns me moving forward with regard to our budget, and this came to my attention, is that, and they're going to be very, very difficult decisions, is that we as a council have to determine what we are going to continue to fund and not fund, and what comes under, what comes under our purview. And that comes from a senior staff person. Okay, so I'm just saying that, and I'm just putting it out there. And I'm just making a comment. It's not a criticism or anything like that. And we're going to be put in a really, really tough position because, as I understand it, next year is going to be a very, very difficult year for us as well. It's going to be up around 7 or 8%. And then I think the next 2 years it goes down to 3%. I'll stand corrected. But I am concerned about it because at some point in time, we as a council are going to have to make a decision to decide what we're going to continue to fund and what we're not going to continue to fund. And it's a very difficult decision. It's a scary decision. I mean, if you look at hospice, it serves the greater good of the entire region. The hospitals serve the greater good of the entire region. I know I've used the Niagara Falls Hospital. So, I just have this, this very serious concern that's probably going to eat away at me for a little while. So I just want to make those comments. And of course, I'll look forward to working with staff and our team to see, what options are available. I don't know if we'll have any future funding from the province or the feds, for infrastructure or whatever, but I just wanted to make that comment. So, yeah, that's it. Thank you, Chair, for your indulgence.
Thank you, Councillor Sorrento. So just a couple of quick things just to go back and clarify, and Councillor Bateman. So those were the DC exemptions for industry that came back onto the plate. With Councillor Sorrento, you forgot the lovely Lincoln and the great Grimsby as well with Go. So as you were doing your stuff with that. And something, and just a quick comment on your last item, nobody ever said it was easy being a regional councillor. So we got some work ahead of us. Any other questions or comments? Seeing none, please vote using, I guess we're using the buttons now, the yes, no buttons. So please use that. And for those of you that are online, yes or no there, please. Okay, so everybody's okay. That is approved. Let us move on to our next report this morning, which is CSD 18-2023. First of all, let's get this on the floor. Can I ask Councillor Height to move that we put this on the floor? Councillor Bateman, would you second that, please? Thank you. And so I'm going to turn this over to Commissioner Harrison.
Thanks, Chair. Real quickly, this report is a requirement of our ISIP agreement with the federal and provincial governments. The original agreement was signed in August of 2019, and there's been a couple of extensions. The ISIP agreement ends March 31st, 23. It's important that we approve this is a compliance audit that is required. It's important that we approve this and move forward so that we can receive our holdbacks for the construction of the property, which is approximately $5.8 million. It's some about the report. The audit is of the costs that were incurred for the construction of Capital Games Park up to February 7th, 2022. It also includes revenue that we received up to it, as well as it includes, you can see that on the fundraising, we used the entire Walker commitment of $3 million. It does not represent the full costing and revenues of the entire capital project, which CAO Tripp and our staff will be providing an update to council in the next little while. And similarly, the host society will be providing its finalized operating summary of the games and their portion of the capital projects, and that will be done once their year end's over, which is March 31st, and they'll have a financial statement completed. Certainly, I'm prepared to take any questions at this time.
Thank you. We have Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm just full of compliments on this right now. My compliments to Doug Hamilton and his staff. I say 1.9 or approximately $1 million profit on this. My compliments to the council 2 terms ago, coming together, everyone on agreeing to that, and to the volunteers and the people that did it now. I can't wait to see the economic statement when it comes in, because I know that when we talked about this 2 terms ago, it was based on the games in Sherbrooke, Quebec, and it showed the economic values coming into our area as a result of this. And that was the thing that put us over the top, saying we support this. So I guess my only question is, when do you think we'll get the economic statement from the committee and that to show the value of this? Please.
So, Mr. Tripp.
Thank you, Chair, through you, and I was hoping I'd get the opportunity to indicate to Council that we have a special council meeting on March 23rd at 4 o'clock. I will be presenting the region's perspective on Canada Games Park, and Doug Hamilton will be here presenting overall with the games themselves.
So that will have the economic factors in it?
I'm not sure that it's 100% finalized, because the commissioner mentioned their year end. It's just before that, but I think it's a pretty solid view of that.
That's good news. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something you said, Councillor Gale. The statements that are in front of you right now indicate a 1.9 difference between revenue and expenses, but it's as of February 7th. So
yes,
that's something that the CAO and Mr. Hamilton will be addressing.
And I understand, and that's good news. I'd hate to have a deficit coming into it on that, but thank you for that.
Thank you, Councillor Gale. Councillor Sorrento.
Thank you, Chair. That's a tremendous legacy, and a shout out again to Chair Hamilton and Marketing Director Victoria Wickinson and his entire team, the volunteers, our staff, everybody who had anything to do with it. And St. Catharines actually got, I believe, a new boathouse rowing facility out of the deal, which is phenomenal. And my question, Chair, through you to Commissioner Harrison, is I did read in the report that there were $4 million of ineligible expenses. So I'm just wondering if I could get some clarification on that, how it's going to be paid for, and that's basically it. Please.
So as Councillor Gale alluded to, the revenues and the expenditures total have been paid for. The ineligible expenses relate to the funding agreement, what's included as eligible, and that's really for the calculation of what the federal and provincial government's contribution is. And so I'm happy to say that we've met that requirement. But to answer your question, the ineligible expenses, and these were identified at the beginning of the games, would include such things as office space in Canada Games Park, but also any expenditures that happened after February 7th, which there was, would be ineligible as well, and as well as there are commissions on the fundraising, because we hired a third party on that, and some items of furniture and project management costs that don't meet the requirements of the ISIP agreement. And you're familiar, you've seen ISIP agreements previously in St. Catharines, I'm sure, and there is a distinction depending on the agreement, what's eligible and what's ineligible. So those are the bulk of it, as well as, so that's pretty well it.
Thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Councillor Sorrento. Councillor Height.
Yes, through the staff, probably our CAO, just to refresh our memory, about 8 years ago when we made the commitment, was there a dollar figure that the region committed, and we looked at the province and the feds, and there was a certain amount, and then obviously through COVID, and I'm not sure if we got COVID funding, extra funding, because I kept asking our staff regarding that issue that we should be getting COVID funding because of the cost overrun. Are we going to see that kind of breakdown 2 weeks from now at the presentation? Because there should be some funding from COVID because of the cost overrun that we ran over the last 2 years. Are we going to see that in the report 2 weeks from now?
So short answer, yes, you're going to see all that we have. I'm not sure I would agree that there was funding provided to the games associated with the year delay and potentially related or indirectly related to COVID. But in terms of the construction project itself, which is Canada Games Park, the additional costs that we saw along the way weren't necessarily related to COVID. But you're going to see as fulsome information as we have at that time.
Because obviously, at that point, we're going to find out whether there's a profit, and then we can determine where that profit goes. Is that not we're going to be looking at 2 weeks from now?
Through you, Chair, yes, it's a discussion about what is still outstanding, what is potentially surplus, and what is how that surplus is utilized.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Height. Don't see any other person. Oh, I see a waving person. So, Councillor Gale, please go ahead.
Yeah, I don't know what button to push for a second time on this, but I don't think there is a button. Sorry for a second time, Mr. Chair. If possible in this report, can we, one of the selling factors of this Canada Summer Games is that it would benefit every community, every municipality in the Niagara region. And I look at Mayor Grant across the way and I wonder what benefited Wainfleet. I know Buffalo Canoe Club for Fort Erie and places like this. So I'd like to have a report on how every community in our area benefited. I know in Niagara Falls it was Oaks Park. I look at Mayor Grant and I say, what benefited Wainfleet? I'd like to know myself on this because that's how we brought it together on this. And I'm sure he would like to know too. So if we can get that, I'd appreciate it. Thank you.
Through you, Chair, thank you. I appreciate the question. The host society, Doug Hamilton, has provided presented a wrap-up presentation, and you're going to see that again on the 23rd. It's not short, but it's very good. And one of the comments I had, we're going to be meeting in advance of that, is to highlight how it, not only through the games, but moving forward, has relevance to all communities. Because although he touches on that, it's not a highlight, and I figured that council would be very much interested in that.
So thank you, and that's just a forewarning because I would appreciate Mayor Grant asking what how he benefited if he doesn't see it. Thank you.
There you go. Okay, so please vote yes, no, or electronically at home, your yes, no as well, please. That is carried. Just a quick comment after all of that. I was, and for Mayor Grant, they did have a very successful time trial with the bicycling in Wainfleet, and it was really good. They, I was down there looking after the technology pieces of the puzzle. Very well attended, very well received within the community. So there's, you know, all around there's a lot of very positive things came about from this. And also to Councillor Gale, my master's degree in public admin, my essay was on, my final essay was on Canada Games. So we are going to be getting a very fulsome report on the economic spin-offs and stuff like that. It's really should be quite cool.
And Mr. Chair, what did you score on your essay?
Perfect, of course, but at least that's what I remember. So, let's move on to the consent items here. And can I get Councillor Sorrento to move that we accept our consent items? Councillor Grant, can you please second that? Yep. And of course, there is just the one, which is the remuneration. I'm not the top, but in the top 5. Yes. Along with Councillor Gale. So, any questions or comments to this report? Seeing none, please vote electronically, yes or no, in whatever situation you have. And that is carried. We're going to move into other business, and I'm just going to make a quick comment myself as well before we get into the rest. So it is International Women's Day today, and I thank Councillor Bateman for pointing that out. I was also listening on the radio this morning in discussions that were going on with the roundtable on CKTV, and Anyway, I thought this was an interesting quote. Imagine a gender equal world, a world free of bias, stereotypes, and discrimination, a world that's diverse, equitable, and inclusive, a world where difference is valued and celebrated. Together we can forge women's equality. And so, please, in your own way, celebrate International Women's Day today. Councillor Bateman?
Thank you, Chair. I have 3 items. One being I'd like to just provide some context and some comments as a new regional councillor regarding International Women's Day. The second, I realize as Clerk Norio and as I dream about council now, it's the interesting thing. It came to me in a dream that I was bringing this up at the wrong committee. It should come under Public Works, but I would like to just mention it because I do think that it speaks to a service that our corporation is offering, and then I'll move on if that's okay. And then the third was sorry, here there's so much going on. The social procurement policy. So humor me for a second, please. So as Chair Foster said, today is March 8th, and that's International Women's Day. It's a global day to recognize and celebrate women, girls' social, economic, cultural, and political achievements. We also must recognize the many inequalities that exist, and as municipal representatives, we have a responsibility to remove barriers and advocate to other levels of government to support equitable legislation and funding for women to participate fully in all that our region has to offer. So I was putting my financial statement, I was submitting it yesterday at the City of St. Catharines, and I'm walking through City Hall, and they have pictures of all of the mayors. And since 1845, I believe, when the City of St. Catharines, I'm a regional councillor representing the City of St. Catharines, of 61 mayors, not one is a woman. Around this particular table, there are 32 of us, 9 are women, and 2 are mayors and thus lead their municipality. So this council has devoted our work to understanding and supporting the most vulnerable populations, and I'm really, really proud of us for taking that stance, and I hope we continue that momentum. There are obvious facts that still exist according to the Canadian Women's Foundation. We are still only paid 75 cents on the dollar that a man is paid. We still need access to affordable, safe childcare across our region. And we need to recognize how much work women do that remains unpaid. So politicians have decisions that have an incredible impact on the lives of women. And I think that has to be something we think about when we vote and when we make decisions and when we bring things forward. And we also have to create a very safe space for women to participate. And that although that this may seem lighthearted jokes about this day and jokes about inequities, they're not welcome by me. I think that we need to stop them, and we need to provide respect to one another, all of us who are sitting around this table. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak about the importance of this day, what it means to me as a parent of 2 boys and a daughter. It is my hope that we could recommit to our understanding of what today represents for women in all equity-deserving groups. So thank you. My next item was the social procurement policy. I spoke to Commissioner Harrison. I planned to realize, again, I'm new, so I didn't quite realize that this had already been brought up. I believe it was on January 2022 agenda. I spoke with Commissioner Harrison about a policy. I don't mean to speak for you now, but I believe you said it will come at the May meeting.
Sorry. Yeah, I said that in the budget discussion, I think Councillor Houston had indicated, I believe I indicated that we would be April, potentially May. I don't think I said potentially May, but it's now March.
It's on the record now.
Yeah. Certainly, we were working on a report prior to the end of the term of last council. We'll be bringing forward something. I'm not sure it's going to be the full policy at this time because what we were tasked to do is to go back and look at what others have done and to provide what the impact would be on the organization. So it's a two-step process. It doesn't preclude us from bringing a policy forward, but I think there's work to be done so that council's fully aware of what the implications of doing social procurement would be. And it's not a bad thing. It's just that there is costs associated with it. When we did some of the review, and it's mostly larger municipalities that have done that, that might have more wherewithal within their procurement team or whatever. So I'm committed to bringing back in May that report, and then we'll have this to this committee, and then you can make a decision, and we can move forward.
Wonderful. Could I offer a friendly correction to cost benefit instead of just cost?
Certainly, that was always my intention,
Okay.
cost benefit. I stand corrected, but that was I think it would be a more fulsome review of what the impact of it would be on the organization and what would be necessary to implement such that, and the timing of that.
I hope I'm not overstepping my role as a council, but will the manager of diversity, equity, and inclusion at the region have a part in that?
We've engaged all of the commissioners as well as certain staff already, and certainly we will be adding all the voices that are necessary for that. I think Director Minaj, who's behind you, has done a good job of engaging, and we will be finalizing that and include the staff that's required, including the person you just mentioned.
Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Whalen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. At Public Health yesterday, we were made aware that we have a potential with us helping the asylum seekers in Niagara, and a potential $6 million cost that might fall on the taxpayer. Hopefully, we won't have that, and the provincial government steps forward. A question to Director Harrison, or Commissioner Harrison: will that come to this council or this committee also with a report on just where that status is, or will that come to Public Health and back to us?
Excuse me. I think because it's a service that's being, I think it's community services is actually engaged on that file, and it would come back to that committee. But I wasn't at the committee yesterday, so I might turn to CAO Tripp to clarify that for me.
Thank you. Through you, Chair. The actual discussion about the services provided and how we provide them would come to community services. Should there be a budget adjustment necessary, there would likely be some companion work that comes through this committee as well.
So potentially, that's why we should help these people, because it is important. Just the $5.5 million surplus in Q4. If we don't get that funding, I would imagine it would be a deficit as opposed to a surplus. Would that be the case? So hopefully the provincial government steps forward and helps us out, because these people definitely need the help. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Whalen. And that exhausts the list.
Councillor Bateman actually wasn't finished.
Sorry, Chair.
She wasn't.
No, I could go on forever.
She was already over 10 minutes.
Oh, get out of here.
Anyway, go ahead, Councillor Bateman. Please make it quick.
Thank you. Make it quick. Thank you. Thank you, Councillor. Yep. So again, to my comment, and Clerk Norio has provided me with guidance, which I always appreciate. I do have a comment with respect to managing budget and encouraging better practices, and it goes back to waste management. And just to clarify, I totally respect where CAO Tripp was talking about the comparison between garbage and organics or recyclables. But I think what I would hope to see from this council moving forward is to really empower residents to do their part. And that kind of means acting as a leader and explaining what we can do to mitigate that, whether it is having compost areas that are free of rodents in our homes, anything that we can do. We should start doing it now to kind of minimize those. So when we come back to budget and items and receiving reports, we can be sure as councillors that we're providing the information that is needed to residents. I mean, that even speaks to grants, wastewater management. If we can do better in our homes, especially when we're doing renovations or anything like that, then we should. So sorry that I'm rambling, but I wanted to get that in there, and I thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Councillor Bateman. With that, I'm going to bring this meeting to an end. And our next meeting is going to be Wednesday, April the 5th at 9:30 a.m. in this chamber here at Regional Headquarters. Meeting adjourned.